All right, let's talk pre-approvals when it comes to first-time home buyers. Why just first-time homeowners for pre-approval? Because everybody, you need a pre-approval no matter what, do you not?
Yeah, I think a pre-approval for everybody is a great idea.
Yeah.
Obviously, some borrowers are very confident. They feel like they don't need a pre-approval. But a pre-approval is not just a pre-qualification. A pre-approval also really means that we're underwriting the file. We're making sure that we have your income, your assets, and your credit all in there appropriately. Mm-hmm. But the pre-approval also includes a rate hold. So basically, we are keeping a rate in place for you. So if the rates do go up, we know based on that pre-approval, the rate is good for 120 days from the date that we submit it.
Is that from one in particular lender, or how's that work?
No, majority of lenders will do a rate hold for 120 days.
No, but I'm saying you do the rate hold and then you shop it around.
Well, we do a rate hold with one lender. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you make an actual purchase, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to go back to that lender.
Right.
Oftentimes we will, but not 100% of the time. There's a lot of changes in the market, as you can imagine. Right. Rates change. And maybe the rate that we had on your rate hold isn't as good as what's available today.
And maybe you may have to go with somebody else because they may not want the deal that you have proposed.
Yeah, that is certainly possible too.
The home, they might not like the house or whatever it might be.
Exactly. And maybe the borrower situation has changed. And I think that's what really makes mortgage lending unique. I've said it before. It's kind of like a snowflake. We look at income, we look at assets, and we look at credit. And we really drill down on what the best possible scenario is. And that's for the first-time home buyer. And that's from a repeat home buyer. It could be someone maybe buying a second home, or maybe you're buying a rental property. Everybody's situation is different. And I think everybody's situation kind of at one moment it's a snapshot in time. We don't know, things change from day to day. And that's why I think it's so important to basically know exactly where you're going to be. And we can make a really good plan to be able to forge that forward.
Do people need a down payment to get a pre-approval? Like proof of a down payment?
We don't necessarily verify it, Todd.
Yeah.
Usually we'll take their word for it. But you certainly do need to provide the proof when you have a real live offer.
Yeah.
And that proof could be maybe it's a gift from family. We're talking a lot about gifted down payment. And that's certainly more prevalent than it has been before. And if it's a gifted from a family, typically there's a form that we would be able to provide the borrower that they would complete with their person who's given the gift. And oftentimes we need confirmation of where the gift came from, or confirmation that those gifted funds went into that borrower's bank account. So that's certainly one thing. If the money's coming from your savings, that's pretty easy. Normally lenders ask for either 30 days or 90 days history that you've had the funds in your account. And don't move the funds around. Keep the funds in one place until we've verified, the history. When there's a lot of deposits and a lot of transfers between multiple accounts, it makes it very challenging for us, but it makes it really challenging for you. Like imagine if you had eight accounts, Todd, and you had to provide 8 accounts, 90 days history.
Right.
That would certainly be a lot of paperwork for you, and certainly a lot of paperwork for me. We don't mind doing it, but when you have to verify 90 days history on an account that has $1,000 just to get to that price point, it certainly can be very sticky, and it's certainly a lot of friction for borrowers.
How often do deals break down because the down payment is not what was presented?
You know what? We request documentation for a down payment, on every purchase file. Oftentimes we'll request it up front, maybe when we submit the file for approval, because we know we're going to need it for conditions, right? It would shock you the large deposits in people's accounts. It would shock you the amount of money that just moves around. And I think sometimes it moves around frivolously. Like I'm not really sure why borrowers move it from like a checking to a savings to an investment, back to the savings, back to a checking, but oftentimes across multiple financial institutions. And I basically sometimes need to be a forensic auditor to be able to put the documentation together to ensure it's going to be acceptable to the lender. Mm-hmm. No down payment verification, no mortgage. It's really as easy as that. And it's all fine for you to say, yeah, I have the down payment, or yeah, but we have to prove where it's coming from.
Right.
And one of the big reasons we have to do that, Todd, is anti-money laundering. We're required by law to verify the funds. And at the end of the day, we're really your advisor. We're your agent. We're your broker. We're basically the gatekeeper between the borrower and the lender. And that's why it's important for us to put all the documentation together, because we know what's going to be acceptable and what's not. And we don't bother We don't come back to people asking for documentation just for the sake of it. We do it to make sure it's going to be smooth and to make sure that it's not going to put your approval in jeopardy. And, sometimes we see things in the bank statements that may negatively impact your approval, and maybe we're able to make another recommendation, or maybe we'll be able to change the direction with the approval. And we've certainly done that. Lots of questions around cryptocurrency.
Yeah, for sure. Is that accepted, by the way?
It's not.
It's not, no.
It's not Canadian funds.
Yeah, right.
Right? And we can't prove where it's been.
That might change, though, down the road.
It
10
might
years down the road.
change. It certainly might change. And, there's certainly more noise in the media about people selling their homes and they're only accepting crypto. And, it may change. I would say it's similar to if the funds were offshore in another institution. Mm-hmm. The challenge is with crypto, very volatile, and it's really hard to track the history of those funds.
Right. And
I'm not saying that crypto is impossible to use. I'm not. What I'm saying is that needs to become negotiable Canadian funds and in an account for either 30 days or 90 days before you're really making an offer on a property. So we have the appropriate history. So, if you're planning on buying a house, convert those funds in Canadian. You're going to need it anyway.
Right.
What are you holding on for another 30, 60, 90 days? You're only making your situation more challenging. And it's more challenging for you, which means it's more challenging for us, which means it's more challenging for your lender. And we don't want to put your financial transaction at risk because of something so silly about why don't you sell your RSP?
Yeah.
Why don't you sell your investment? No, don't do it. Obviously, if you're going to move money around, like what I said, don't move any money around until we have done our verification, basically with the exception of crypto, because you need to sell that. Probably the prudent date is 90 days before you're even making an offer on a property.
And I would think with investments as well, if it's particularly in a volatile investment, and you've got a couple of weeks before closure, and you have that in that vehicle, you could lose that money, right?
100%. And some lenders actually require us to provide confirmation that you've cashed that RRSP. Even as a first-time home buyer, as part of the home buyer's plan, you can take up to $35,000 each as a first-time home buyer out of your RRSP. Some lenders require, obviously, the 90 days history that the funds were in the RRSP. But in addition, they require confirmation that those funds went into the bank account. The reason being, Todd, is exactly what you said.
Exactly.
Volatile. They need to make sure that you still had enough funds in your account to be able to make that withdrawal and that the funds that you're withdrawing were eligible for withdrawal. So, super, super good points here. If we're doing a purchase for you, and if one of the conditions is that you need to withdraw that money from your RSP, we as a firm are not giving a firm confirmation of financing until all your conditions have been satisfied. It's in your best interest. It's in the person who's selling you the home the best interest, the realtors, the lawyers, the lenders, everybody. And we want to make sure that all the conditions have been satisfied because it's really our job to make sure that we're protecting you, which is our client. So we really want to make sure that we have your best interest at heart.